Irakse magte is op die punt om Mosoel binne te gaan. Die stad word vir die afgelope 2 jaar deur die terreurgroep die Islamitiese Staat beheer. Hoe betekenisvol sal die inval van Mosoel wees in die stryd teen die bloeddorstige IS? Naim Jeenah, direkteur van die Afro-Middle East Center, sluit nou by my aan. Naim, welcome. Why does the advance on Mosoel happen only now in November 2016?
Well, I think we should start answering that question by when Mosoel fell to the Islamic State group. IS took over Mosoel with just a few hundred fighters, literally. It's a city, second largest city in the country, about 2 million people. They marched in with about 500 fighters and they took over. The Iraqi army dropped their weapons and ran, basically. So it's been a long process of kind of reconsolidating the Iraqi army, remotivating them, all of those kinds of things, dealing with the corruption within the army and all of that. And then also IS had by then established itself not only in Mosoel but also in a number of other cities around. So the process of getting to Mosoel, in a sense, required battles in these other cities. So you had the fall of Ramadi, Fallujah and other cities before they got to Mosoel.
And so these battles have diminished the territory that IS controls, right?
Yes, absolutely.
How damaging has that been to IS? I mean, they dream of establishing a physical, tangible caliphate, right? For that you need land.
Yes. So, I mean, they in a sense, they had established a state or pseudo-state or proto-state, if you like, over that territory spanning part of Iraq and part of Syria. The fact that, and one of the indicators for themselves of their success is to maintain control over the territory that they've captured and to rule, which they had done for a while. So the fall of or the loss of any of this territory is severely damaging to that kind of idea. So even if it's not Mosoel but the other towns, means that its territory is shrinking, and its its slogan, which is not just a slogan but is part of the strategy, Islamic State Group remains, Islamic State Group expands, right? That has been shrinking over the past year or so, and with Mosoel that will be a huge knock for them.
Will a shrinking territory make joining IS less attractive to prospective recruits in Europe, in South Africa, these places?
Yes, for a few reasons. One is that it's no longer as romantic as it sounded in the past. So in the past it was, okay, we're going to live there and we'll defend the state. Now there's a serious war going on. So from that perspective, it's not as attractive. Secondly, the romanticism of this kind of caliphate, etc., is slowly diminishing and not, soon won't exist. They won't be controlling a territory which they can call a state, and you're not talking about that. And thirdly, in general, the kind of ideological and political project of IS, which is premised on the notion of controlling territory and having a state. Once that doesn't exist, the project doesn't exist. And I think there will therefore be a lot of disillusionment among prospective supporters or recruits.
But in an effort to cling to those assets and the territory that they still control at the moment, they've resorted to pretty horrific tactics which have been ventilated in the media in this past few days, including the use of human shields, burning oil wells to make it impossible to be bombed. I guess all of us would have done that. Summary executions and the like. I mean, have we learned something new about how they go about fighting and how they go about governing?
Well, I don't think we've learned much new about how they go about fighting. Much of the kind of brutality that you're talking about has become par for the course for IS. They've done in the period before this push now, they've done much worse things than that. So I don't think that the brutality is much of a surprise. In terms of the governing, we're not learning anything new now. I think after Mosoel falls and then after Raqqa falls, we certainly will through academic work and journalists going in and interviewing people, etc., learn a lot. There's little bits coming out now and then, but we're still in the middle of a war. But I should also say that there actually has been some good work done over the past 2 years in terms of the governance and how the governance structures, how they operate, etc. We have a book coming out soon on that topic, on their governance and their strategies, etc. But we will learn much more after the fall of particularly Mosoel and Raqqa.
But they still control oil revenue, I guess, which enables them to procure arms from somewhere.
Yes, but once they lose Mosoel, that will be a big blow even to that. So the loss of Mosoel is not only losing territory, but it's also the oil wells around the city that they've been controlling and which has been a big source of the income. But of course the biggest source of the income has been taxes that they've levied. The more territory they lose, particularly urban territory with people, the lower their tax revenue. And so it's also a big blow in terms of the finances going forward.
So this campaign really has weakened them. Who is inside this coalition fighting against IS?
Well, it's quite a few groups. So it's firstly the Iraqi army, of course, and in a sense it seems that they're taking the lead, certainly from media reports, but I think that we should look at their position in comparison to others. So the Iraqi army is advancing on Mosul from the south and the west. Then we have the Kurdish Peshmerga forces, which are also, of course, part of Iraq, but the Kurdish autonomous part of Iraq. They're advancing from the east and the north. And then you also have you now have Turkish forces over the past week have been introduced to the battle at the quote-unquote invitation of the Peshmerga Kurdish forces. So the Turks are in the mix. And then, of course, there's air support from the United States and other allies. So there's a number of forces that are part of the coalition.
Naeem, just briefly, I mean, as it becomes more difficult for IS to operate in Iraq, can they not simply move into Syria where there's still chaos, right?
Yes, they can. I mean, one of the things that has happened as part of the push against Mosul is that there have been forces moved to the border in order to block that exit. But clearly that's not going to be sufficient. I think a number of the fighters from Mosul will move into Syria, but a lot of them will die, will fall in battle. But they will then be making their last stand, in a sense, in Syria and particularly in Raqqa, which is kind of the Syrian capital.
What has this done, Naeem, to IS's ability to organize terror attacks abroad?
I think there's much more focus now on really preservation within the country, within the area that they control. So there's less attention given to things abroad. However, they have cells abroad that have no intention necessarily of going to the territory that is controlled. So if an instruction is given, for example, for the battle to be taken to Europe, that could, I think, easily happen. I think that they're going to be weighing their options going forward, but certainly the focus is on preserving what they have at the moment.
Thank you so much. Dit was Naeem Jeenah van AMEC.